Good morning, Shalom, and as we all know, Chag Sameach for this upcoming holiday of Pesach. My name is Rich Cohen, and I am the Adult Education Chair of Rina, an independent minyan in South Orange, New Jersey. We are delighted this morning to bring you today's program with Dr. Gary Rensburg on the Haggadah. Rina is a small, traditional, egalitarian Jewish congregation located in South Orange, New Jersey. We hold weekly religious services in person and on Zoom, and would love you to visit us. For information on our community and our activities, I will put our email address in the chat shortly. And of course, let us all pray for our friends and family in Israel at this very difficult time. Rina's adult education programs, including our part in today's talk, are sponsored by the Susan Marks Education Fund. Susan Marks was an artist and a very involved and enthusiastic member of Rina. When she died 3 years ago, she gave a significant endowment to Rina to be used for adult education for the whole community. In her will, Susan requested that a chair be set aside for her at each event sponsored by her fund. We take a moment to symbolically remember and thank Susan for her wonderful contribution to Jewish adult education by showing this chair entwined by a characteristically colorful scarf that she always wore. Upcoming Rina programs. Today, we eagerly look forward to hearing Gary Rensburg, and we will have Gary back with us again on Sunday morning, June 9th. He will be discussing at that time the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we hope that you can join us for that program. If you've signed up on Eventbrite, you will be receiving a notice of that. And Sunday morning, May 5th, Professor Brian Kirshen, Professor of Spanish Linguistics at Binghamton University, will give us an introduction to Ladino, the Jewish lingua franca of the Sephardic community, and the culture of the Sephardic community that resulted in Ladino becoming a language for so many people there. A couple of logistics before we get started. First of all, if you heard some music as the program was beginning, that was Shira Klein getting us in the holiday spirit with some Pesach music. Also, because we have such a large number of people here today, I notice at the moment we're up to 57 screens. We're going to ask you to put any comments you have in the chat. Dr. Rensburg will be stopping partway through the program to answer some of those questions, and then he will answer the rest of them at the end of the program. We hope there will be time for that. And now you don't really you haven't come here to hear me, you've come here to hear Dr. Rensburg. And a little introduction, Dr. Rensburg serves as the chair in Jewish history and holds the rank of distinguished professor in the Department of Jewish Studies at Rutgers University. His teaching and research focus on all things ancient Israel, primarily language and literature, although history and archaeology. And he has many, many other related interests. One of the things that excites me so much about Dr. Rensburg is how well he's able to collect and translate so many interesting Jewish manuscripts over time. And we welcome his wife, Melissa, who is here today too. And we also have a chance to welcome Dr. Rensburg to his new home. And he had the courage and audacity to move this week, a couple of weeks before Pesach. So without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. Gary Rensburg, and Len, switch me off this and spotlight Dr. Rensburg at this point.
Thank you so much, Rich. Let me go full screen here so you can see all these beautiful images. And yes, first of all, thanks totally to Rich and will add treasure to that as well, for hosting and being the adult chair at Kol Rina. Remarkable congregation, and it just shows you what a relatively small congregation can do in a much larger scale, both locally in South Orange and also, of course, more broadly via Zoom, since I see people whom I know joining us from elsewhere, not just from New Jersey. So thank you to all my friends who are here. I could start naming names that I saw on the participant list, but I would feel that I might forget somebody. But I will say something here or there about somebody based on some of the manuscripts we'll be looking at. So yes, thank you very much. It's really wonderful. And indeed, when we set this up for today, we didn't realize we would be moving homes. Of course, we didn't know we'd be moving home so close to Pesach either. But here we are in our new home and ready to go. Unfortunately, all my books are not unpacked yet. So I have only one book to show you. I was hoping to show you some others, but we'll manage with the one that we have. And here we are. 8 days before Pesach, the Passover Haggadah through the ages, Jewish texts, Christian surprises, and how timely to present this for you. We'll get to the Prado Haggadah, which you see right there on the right, right before our break. But let's begin with the beginnings. Where does the Haggadah come from? The basis of the Haggadah is in the Mishnah. Now, to refresh your memories about the Mishnah, it is the earliest rabbinic text. It is the foundational text of rabbinic Judaism. It was compiled around 200 CE in the land of Israel, in Sipori in the Galilee, and it organizes in a much more systematic way the governing laws and principles of Judaism, much more than you would find in the Torah, which is to say, you can find the laws of Passover in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Numbers, and in Deuteronomy at various places. And the Mishnah takes all of that material and puts it all in a single tractate known as Pesachim. So this is Mishnah Pesachim chapter 10. And of course, the Bible doesn't talk about anything like a Seder. The Bible understands that the worship of God should occur through the sacrifices in the temple. But already while the temple was standing, perhaps, and certainly after the temple was destroyed in 70 CE, Jews sought other ways to observe the holidays, and most famously, the Passover Seder develops as an institution, a home-based ritual, in fact, not a synagogue-based ritual, and at the core of it is the recitation of the Haggadah. And it is all laid out, the basics of it are laid out for us in Mishnah Pesachim chapter 10. This is one of the two oldest complete manuscripts of the Mishnah. It's called the Kaufman manuscript. It's in Budapest today, written in Italy, but it's in Budapest. And how better to start out than with a great factoid? There are only 3 questions. We'll get to the 4 questions in a moment, but there are only 3 questions. Dipping, why do we dip? Not once, but twice. Why do we eat matzah and not other types of bread? And roasting. Why do we eat roasted meat? We'll come to that, those questions. There's the 3. And as you can see, if you can read Hebrew here, it starts out, let me bring up my laser pointer. It starts out with the usual manishtana halayla hazeh, mikol halelot. And there are only 3 shebachol halelot and all other nights. And then it tells you the 3 issues, which you see there in the bottom left text box. The other equally old manuscript of the Mishnah, not as accomplished a scribal hand, but all still very legible, again begins in the same way. This one was also written in Italy, in the south of Italy actually, but it's today housed in Parma in the north of Italy. And it says here, manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, and then only 3 shebachol halelot on all other nights. And so you have, again, the same 3 questions in this copy of the Mishnah as you had in the Kaufman manuscript. And the third complete manuscript is this one, the Low manuscript in Cambridge. And again, it only has 3 questions as well, 4 little boxes there because the third one goes from the end of the line down to the beginning of the next line. If we look at Cairo Geniza documents, we see all from around the same time period, The ones I just showed you are mainly European, that is to say Italian, but if you go to the Cairo Geniza, which is mainly Egyptian material, you can see at the beginning there where the arrow is, Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, and then it goes on and again gives you the same three questions. So this is clearly, this is not the Passover Haggadah yet, I want to emphasize. These are manuscripts of the Mishnah, clearly understanding only three questions, ditto for this Cairo Geniza document as well, also in Cambridge. Now, that's the basis. Now we move to the Haggadah. The earliest Haggadah we have is this one right here, and the next one I'll show you. This one is at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, from the Cairo Geniza. And it starts out there, if you can see the first two words, Kiddush Pesach. Now that may look like a final mem, but that's a shin. Kiddush Pesach, the sanctification of Passover, meaning the wine. And if you can read this, and I will talk about the handwriting in just a moment, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagefen, the blessing on the wine. Baruch atah Adonai, and it goes on, Eloheinu melech haolam, here, Asher Kidesh, etc. Asher Kidesh Yisrael Amo, right? It may not be the Kiddush that you recite because there are different versions based on Ashkenazic and Sephardic practices, and even within Sephardic practices, some differentiations based on this is, of course, more than a millennium old. But there you see it. Now, who wrote this? If I go back a moment, maybe not this one, but certainly this one and some of the other ones that I showed you, these are written by professional scribes. You can tell by looking at the handwriting and the ease of the straightness of the lines and the margins and so on, that this is a professional scribe writing out a copy of the Mishnah. Who wrote this? This is clearly not a professional hand. And I want to introduce you, if you've never been introduced to medieval manuscripts, to the wonder of manuscripts. This is clearly a head of household writing out a copy of the Haggadah, almost undoubtedly for personal use at the Seder in that family setting. Most likely this person borrowed his, I'm going to say this with a smile, borrowed his neighbor's Haggadah, or went to the synagogue and looked for a copy and just copied it out best as he could, because he's not a trained scribe. He's literate, he can write, he can read this, and there you have it, he has a Haggadah. Today we take it for granted. Everybody around the Seder table has a copy, and you may go around and you may read, one person read this section, one person read another section, and so on. Here you have one family would be fortunate if they had a single copy at the table, most likely read aloud simply by the head of household. So although this is not a beautiful document, we are so grateful to have this treasure because it's got the earliest Passover Haggadah written not by a scribe again, but by a head of household. And if you come to this, it's several pages long. If you come to this here, you can see Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, shebachol halelot, etc. It's got the basics of the Seder already here in our oldest copy of the Haggadah, and it continues here on the next page. So crudely, if I can use that word, written, but look at how much we learn from a document such as this. The other oldest Haggadah, and they're both from around the year 900 CE, is at the JTS Library in New York, the Jewish Theological Seminary. And there on the bottom right, very difficult to read, worn a little bit, is Manishtana halayla hazeh. You might be able to make out the word halelot here. Frequently, we put these pictures into black and white imaging because we can actually read the contrast is better for us. Interestingly, probably a mistake. There are only two questions here. The question of the matzah has been left out, either because they didn't want to waste ink, he knows it, or a mistake. These are the things we love when we look at these manuscripts. So, the so-called four questions. To summarize, our Mishnah manuscripts have three: dipping, matzah, and roasting. The Penn manuscript has three. The JTS New York manuscript has two. The matzah one probably missing due to a mistake. Now, That was the ritual in the land of Israel. Remember that the Mishnah is written in the land of Israel, and although those early haggadot come from Egypt, they are reflecting the rituals of the land of Israel, either because Egypt is so close to Israel or because Jews from the land of Israel moved to Egypt and brought their customs with them, and they were reciting only 3 questions. The original 3, exactly what the Mishnah or says one should do. There is a second large Jewish community in Babylonia, where the Babylonian Talmud was written, and their tradition was 4 questions, and that's the one that almost all Jews in the diaspora, and in fact in the land of Israel today, have inherited. That's how we get to the 4 questions. So here is an early, again, Cairo Geniza document. This one lists the 4 questions, and what are they? Well, the dipping and the matzah are the same, but the custom in the land of Israel was to eat roasted meat. The custom in the diaspora, including Babylonia, was not to eat roasted meat. So that question was irrelevant to them. It didn't make any sense. As you know, in the biblical tradition, you're supposed to roast the animal for Pesach, the lamb for Pesach. So Jewish communal traditions arose either to continue that roasting or because we no longer have a temple, not to eat roasted meat. So in the land of Israel, they were still roasting, and in, for example, Babylonia and elsewhere, they were not roasting, so that question made no sense at all. Instead, they add a 3rd question on the maror, the bitter herbs, and the 4th question about reclining. The Jews of the land of Israel, in a Greco-Roman world, going back to the time of the Mishnah, they did not have to ask the question about reclining because reclining for the drinking of wine and for a major meal was a typical Greco-Roman, especially Roman, but we have some Greek antecedents, custom. The Jews of Babylonia, living in a more Persian cultural sphere, didn't know what this reclining was all about. They inherited the tradition, but they didn't know what it was all about, so they added that as the 4th question. Everybody following this? It's complicated, but I hope you get it all. So when we begin to look at Passover Haggadot from the Cairo Geniza, which reflect the Babylonian tradition, you now see 4 times Shebachol Halalot with the 4 questions that you see bulleted right here. So the 4 questions: land of Israel, 3, so-called 4, land of Israel 3, per the Mishnah and the Pen Haggadah. The JTS Haggadah is only 2, probably a mistake, and the Babylonian one, 4 questions. Let's have a look at what I was just talking about. This is a reconstruction of one of the villas at Pompeii with the triclinium, and people, these 3 couches, and people would have been lying on these, eating their meals, or as you see here in an artistic reconstruction of Roman triclinium dining. The Jews of Israel did not have to ask this question. They took it for granted that in an elaborate banquet like the Passover Seder, one reclined. Again, the Jews of Babylonia had to ask, why does one do that? So those are the earliest Haggadot, and that's how we get from the 3 questions to the 4 questions. But wait, there's more. This Passover Haggadah text, also from the Cairo Geniza, did not know how to decide the question, again, written by a professional scribe, look how nice it is, did not know how to decide the question. Everybody ready for this? Therefore, this is a Passover Haggadah with 5 questions. It takes all of the questions, the 3 from that tradition, minus the 1, and then adds the 2 from the Babylonian tradition, and gets to 5 questions. 5 times here. You see the beginning of it, Manishtana halay lazem, and then Shebachol 5 times. You know those neighbors whose Seder goes on till 2 a.m.? That's probably these people here who have that extra question, and therefore it takes so much longer. You know those neighbors who finish up by 10 p.m.? They must only be asking 3 questions, okay, right? These are the differences you get in the Jewish tradition before we get the systematized practice of 4 questions, which I believe today is universal amongst all Jews. And there are the 5 to remind you of the items that we've been talking about. Now, those are our very basic Haggadot. As you probably know, the production of haggadot becomes a Jewish artistic venture, especially in Europe, starting in Italy and Spain and Germany. And those are where most of our manuscripts that I'm going to show you will come from. And these are the real beauties of the medieval manuscripts, but I wanted to show you the ones that lack artwork altogether to start. This is the Prado Haggadah. I'm doing these in more or less chronological order. The Prado Haggadah from Spain, 1300, so we're the middle of the Middle Ages, now housed at JTS. And this is just one of its beautifully decorated pages. Halachma'anya, this is the bread of affliction. You see the word ha there, which, by the way, that phrase in this paragraph is Aramaic, not Hebrew. Ha means behold, and, or this in this case, and written against a gilded background. So these are wondrous artistic productions, and we're just going to marvel at these as we proceed. Here is the big letter Ma for the beginning of the Manishtana, again gilded against this blue background. Look at the artwork, look at the letters, look at the margins, plenty of white space around, just absolutely beautiful. Now, I mentioned in the title, Jewish Text, Christian Surprises, because we're going to be looking throughout at a variety of Christian influences, especially on the artwork. So what are we looking at here? In the big box there, it says Rasha, the wicked one, the wicked son. And what do we have? We have a Christian soldier, right? We have somebody dressed up as a soldier. That becomes sort of the emblem of the wicked one, right? By the way, you'll notice marginal notations. The text read Otanu. In the margin, it says Etchem. This is us. This is you, plural. So you actually get to see scribes and later scribes altering the text and so on. And this is a great point to mention, not only for the Passover Haggadah, but for all medieval manuscripts, including in rare occasions Bible manuscripts. There is no fixed text. Every single text is going to be different, produced by a scribe based on what that scribe knew, what manuscript the scribe copied when he produced the new copy. We don't get a standardized text until the age of printing. In the middle of the 15th century, and especially in the 16th century, when Hebrew printing really took off, printers had to decide, what is the text we're going to print? Every manuscript is a sui generis production. My copy will not be your copy. There's no pagination, there's no common pagination, there's no common anything. Paragraphing, the wording will be different. The artwork maybe is there, maybe it's not there. Once you get to the printed version, a printer's going to run off of 300 copies or 500 copies during the time of the Renaissance and the Reformation period. So we get a fixed text, and we are the heirs 500 years later to those fixed text. And most people today, whichever printing they have, will have the same Hebrew text. Now, the great aspect that fascinates all of us with the Prado Haggadah is this. I've been showing you these beautiful pages, how elaborately decorated or illuminated they are, to use the technical word. And look what happens on this page. The scribe has written out the text. He's done the outline everywhere for the artwork, but the scribe, or maybe the artist who collaborated with him, only colored in the first three letters right here of this word, and then oddly, as I like to say, took his lunch break and never came back to finish the manuscript, right? That's it. This is the last part of the artwork. And so we love the Prado Haggadah because it allows us to see the process of manufacturing one of these beautiful illuminated manuscripts. If it's all complete, as the others are, as I will show you, we can extrapolate or reconstruct the process, but now we know how it happened. The scribe wrote out the entire text, outlined stuff, and either the scribe or his colorer, if I can use that word, never came back to complete. And in fact, as you can see in this case, only did half the word and then left it, and the rest of the Prado Haggadah is not illuminated. So we have 30 complete pages with all the artwork, and 58 were left unfinished. And that is, again, this precious document which we possess. Although the Proto-Haggadah was written in Spain, we know that it was in Italy in the year 1617. It must be the heirloom of a Spanish Jewish family who left Spain in 1492, many of whom settled in Italy, where they were welcomed, and in both the Papal States and in Florence and Venice and so on. And in 1617, there is a censor's note here, an Italian church censor. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the church got very concerned about Jewish texts, and they wanted to make sure there was nothing heretical in them, meaning to say anything negative about Jesus. And so the censors would go through and sign their names and a date. And in this case, it's not very legible, but it says 1617. So we know this is a great piece of information for us to let us know that this text was in Italy in 1617. And this is the very end. This is the very end of the Haggadah. If you know those three Hebrew words here, say Seder Haggadah Nishlam, the Seder of the Haggadah is completed. And if you know the Hebrew, you're seeing the song here, which you may recognize, which means that some of the additional songs, including Chad Gadya, famously at the very end of the Passover Seder, is not part of this tradition. These are the things we continue to learn about our medieval manuscripts. Where does it get its name from, and how did it come to the U.S.? This is what we know about it. Written around 1300, it's in Italy in 1617, and then about 300 years plus passed, and was purchased by a private collector in Rome in 1928, who donated it to the Prato family in Italy, who after World War II then sold it to JTS in 1964, where it resides today. And our librarian colleagues at JTS are the custodians of this great document. Okay, I think I'm going to pause here. Let me do a sneak preview. Yep. Okay, this is the place to pause. I'll leave this up and invite any of the questions that Rich can feed me if any questions have come in. You'll have to unmute there, Rich. Yeah.
Okay, looking through the questions, we have a couple of questions. We encourage any of the rest of you to put some questions on the chat at this point. Len Hausman asks, are all texts showing the same three questions? I think you've answered that.
If they had three, they're the same three, yes.
Okay. And then we have a comment from Susan Fitzgibbons. It says, thank you for making this program available to readers of the Jewish News. So interesting. I'd like to just respond to that to say that we welcome anybody who'd like to come to our programs. Susan Marks, our benefactor, would welcome as many people as possible. So please, you can share all of our publicity and information with anybody, and we will be glad to have you come and join us. Jeff, Opera Addict, says, I guess this was a question related to the Prato scribe that quit. He suggested maybe they ran out of money to pay the scribe. What do you think about that, Jeff?
I love that. Thank you very much. Yes, that's another option.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions at this time? If so, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, Dr. Rensburg, you can continue. So,
right. And we will have plenty of time at the end for any questions that come up, whether it's the first part or the remainder, which I'm going to show you. Great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now, this is probably the most famous of the medieval haggadot with its artwork. Because it's known as the bird's head or bird's heads, either way, Haggadah, which raises all manner of questions, which continues to defy definitive answers. So this was produced in Germany, 1300, at approximately the same time as the Proto-Haggadah is being produced in Spain, and it is today housed at the Israel Museum. This is a good point, by the way, to tell you the following. Every medieval manuscript, we're only doing Passover Haggadah today, but every medieval manuscript, and that's not just true of Hebrew, it's true of Latin and Greek and Arabic and whatever, has several stories to tell. One, the story of its original production. Who wrote it, when, where, and for whom? The second story is, where has it been all these years? In whose hands has it passed? I gave you what we know about the Proto-Haggadah. And the third story is, where is it housed today, and who serves as the custodian for this or that document? And in this case, you see the Israel Museum is where this is housed today, where it's on display, as I will show you. So here's your basic text, okay? Now, look at the artwork on the bottom, and we will zoom in on this. We will look at the right-hand art first. Okay, you're reading right to left after all. So here you have a scene of a family making matzah, okay? Do you make your own at home? Do you have one of those hole prickers? Okay, every household needs one of those to make matzah. Head of household on the left, wearing what's called the Judenhut, the Jewish hat, because in the Middle Ages, the Jews of Germany had to wear these special hats, and you'll see them in the artwork more than once. The woman of the household, the wife, looking very fashionable, I must say, with her medieval snood, and on the right, the child in the household. Now, instead of human faces, they have birds' heads. What is that about? That is the thing, that is the question which continues to be asked, as I said, without a definitive answer. Does it have something to do with the prohibition against making graven images or human images or this or that? Maybe. We don't know. I just like to show it, and I don't attempt my own answer. Everybody has attempted an answer, including my colleague Mark Epstein of Vassar College, who does medieval art history, especially Jewish manuscripts. It is simply something to look at without necessarily answering the question. We can just leave it at that for the moment. And then if you look at the left-hand page, right, what's going on? Well, we're carrying the matzah on the tray to the oven, and we're putting it in the oven with one of these things that looks like a pizza shovel, right? I love the mop on the bottom. Everybody have one of those mops, all black now with all the ash every time you clean out your oven. I mean, look how much you can learn. Forget the Passover text for a moment. Just how much you can learn about medieval life here. In this case, what a brick oven looked like and the baking of matzah. Now, you turn the page or a few pages and you come to this. So on the right is the Pharaoh's army pursuing the Jews, the Israelites leaving Egypt. And on the left, a little bit out of chronological order, I guess, and on the left is the Israelites preparing their dough, as you can see, placing it on their shoulders and going off. And I guess that's supposed to be Moses there on the left with the staff. And again, notice the men have the Judenhut, the Jewish hat, okay? And yes, they all have birds' heads. So let's zoom in on this artwork here on the right. Now, the Egyptians are shown with, what would you call these, blank faces, right? They don't have real faces either, but at least they're human in shape. And then you see, oddly, two individuals with birds' heads on the Egyptian side. Well, they should be with the Israelites on the other side, correct? And so, what's going on here? This discovery was made not by my colleague Mark Epstein, but by, as he related to me, his 10-year-old son, who figured out that these two individuals must be Datan and Aviram, or in English, Dathan and Abiram, who are mentioned in the book of Numbers as challenging the leadership of Moses. In the Midrash, Dathan and Abiram, the Midrash says, went over to the Egyptian side and joined the Egyptian army. You won't see that in the biblical text, but that's the Midrash. But since they're still Israelites, they must accordingly be Dathan and Abiram. And Mark Epstein loves to tell this story about he was studying this with his son, and his 10-year-old son saw this. And then Mark said, And who says a day school education isn't worth the money one spends on such things? So this is just amazing material here. Now, the other thing, of course, to notice is there was no horseback riding in the give or take 1200 BCE when the Israelites left Egypt, when the Exodus occurred. The Egyptians had horses and chariots, but by the Middle Ages, of course, there's horseback riding. That's how armies proceeded. And this is looking much more obviously like a medieval army, just as the Jews, the Israelites, are wearing the Judenhut and the snood and so on. So the artwork is totally anachronistic, but it is so lovable to look at. And then even more than that, look at the lead soldier on the upper left carrying the banner. What's on that flag, right? That is the symbol of the Holy Roman Empire, right? That's the army these Jews in medieval Germany knew. They didn't know ancient Egypt, obviously. So all of this artwork is informing, and all of this reality and realia of the Middle Ages is informing the production of our manuscripts. And here you have that scene again up close. Okay, now you go another, well actually this is going back a few pages. This is going back to the Dayenu, which you can see here at the top of the page. If you read the Hebrew, it's the part of the Dayenu. And this is a portrayal of the manna and the quail. Now, the Dayenu line only says if God had provided us the manna, that would be sufficient. Okay, so that's what this is about. But they also show you the quail, at least one bird. Look at the manna, okay, and look at the hands. What is this evoking? These look like wafers from the church, right? That's what you're actually seeing here. You're looking at the manner in which wafers are offered in the Mass in a Catholic church in medieval Europe. And then look at the bird, the single bird, which is representative of the quail. Why would you draw a bird like that? Well, look at this portrayal from a medieval manuscript of Jesus and look at the bird overhead. So here I've circled them for you so you get a sense of the similarities between a Book of Psalms manuscript from the Christian tradition and a Passover Haggadah from the Jewish tradition, from more or less the same time period, separated by about a century, which is the springboard for the following discussion. Scribes and artists worked, Jewish and Christian in Europe, worked in the same workshops. They needed the same parchment. They needed the same ink, they needed the same colors, they needed the same binderies, they needed all the same workmen and tradesmen, and therefore they were influencing one another, except more likely the Christian community with its much larger and more elaborate manuscripts influencing the production of Jewish manuscripts. And you see it right here in the artwork. I mean, I like to picture our Jewish artist like looking over to the guy next to him, what are you drawing over there? And saying, wow, that's amazing, right? And I'm going to do that right here as well. And we're going to see this throughout. We've already seen several instances, Holy Roman Empire banner, the manner in which the quail, which is a dove actually there over Jesus on the left. And this is also still with our bird's head Haggadah. And you're reading, there's a place in the Haggadah where it says that the matzah and the maror are placed before you. And you have it there on the left, and I've blown it up there for you on the right. And the word placed in Hebrew is munachim. That's actually placed, plural, two things. Matzah and maror are placed before you, munachim. Look what the scribe has done. First, he's highlighted this thing with a stylized finger. And then he's got the dots on the mem, the nun, the chet, and the mem of this word. And that spells out his name, Menachem. The scribe wants you to know his name, and he has highlighted it here in this very delightful fashion. And we actually know this scribe from another manuscript known as the Leipzig Machzor for Jewish festival worship. Fantastic stuff every time you look at one of these manuscripts. I'm only going to show you 7 or 8, and I could spend, all day Sunday showing you more. These are so fantastic. The Bird's Head Haggadah, the history of it, we don't know anything about its production for 600 years until around 1900, when it was owned by the Benedict family in Germany. And you see the history of the manuscript here, which somehow survived World War II in Germany, it resurfaced after the war, and was sold to the Bezalel National Museum, the forerunner of the Israel Museum, for $600. So today, of course, this is priceless, and here it is on display in a display case at the Israel Museum. Most of our manuscripts are held by libraries. Occasionally, they're held by museums. Let's next go to the Golden Haggadah, produced in northern Spain, probably Barcelona, around the same time, now in the British Library. The British Library was once part of the British Museum, so when I say here was purchased by the British Museum, that's technically correct. In the late 20th century, the British Library spun off as its own institution. So here is the Golden Haggadah, showing you scenes, 4 scenes on the opening pages of biblical scenes, not necessarily related, by the way, to the Passover story. It starts in Genesis. So in the upper left there, you can see Adam and Eve covering themselves with fig leaves, and it takes you all the way through the beginning of Genesis, all the way to Exodus. Now, where did the artist of the Golden Haggadah get the idea for a page with 4 scenes? Again, look what Christians are doing. This is known as the Picture Bible or the Crusader Bible. It's at the Morgan Library in New York, and it has scenes from the life of Moses. There's baby Moses there on the top 2 scenes and so on. Bottom left is Moses at the burning bush. We'll look at that one in just a moment. So these are the way Christians were doing their Bibles, and therefore the Jewish scribe or artist in this case, is going to produce similarly, right? So if I show you comparisons like this, it doesn't mean that the Bible on the left was actually in Barcelona in 1320 to be produced by our Jewish artist. It's the phenomenon of these 4 panel art pages that unites these medieval manuscripts. Look at the burning bush scenes. Look how similar they are, right? The one on the right, when I look at these, I sometimes have to stop and say, wait a minute, which is which? That's how similar they are. The one on the right is the Golden Haggadah. Look at the sheep, look at Moses, look at the burning bush, look at the one on the left from a Christian Bible, look at the angel of God coming out of the burning bush, look at the sheep. I must say, Moses has a sheepdog. I'm surprised that the Christian manuscript doesn't have a sheepdog. And you get a sense of how similar these are. By the way, remarkably, the one on the left, which is a Christian production, do you see the Hebrew script at the bottom there on the page here? Over here. And this is something else, which I'll tell you in a moment. This is Hebrew script, but it's not Hebrew. It's actually Judeo-Persian. That's the Persian language written in Hebrew, and this is actual Persian over here, which uses something akin to the Arabic script. Why? This Bible, we know, was actually in Persia at some point in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, and that's how it got this Hebrew editions there, and Persian, Judeo-Persian and Persian editions. It's a whole other story about the famous Morgan Library Bible. Staying with the Golden Haggadah, here are Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh. Well, that Pharaoh is not looking very pharaonic as you and I would know because of our discovery of ancient Egypt through the world of archaeology, which you can see in the Metropolitan Museum and the British Museum and so on. What's he looking like? Well, he's looking like any good medieval king, right? So here is our Jewish scribe on the left, Jewish artist, portraying the pharaoh, but the pharaoh looks just like King Louis IX of France or any other medieval king. I mean, just look at the scepter and look at the stance and the robes, and this is the way it is. Look at the hand gestures by Moses and what looks to be like the pharaoh's minister next to him. Look at the hand gestures of the queen on the left here, Blanche of Castile, the wife of King Louis IX. These are the way their hand gestures were done by Christian artists, and our Jewish artist is just channeling all of that when he produces the Golden Haggadah on the left. Now we're leaving Egypt. I told you these art scenes take us all the way through. Here are 4 panels. Look at the soldiers. Here's Joseph's bones being taken out of Egypt, right? Exodus, Joseph's bones being taken out of Egypt, pursuit of the Pharaoh's army, and the drowning in the sea. But look at the army. The army, again, is not looking anything like an Egyptian army, which would not have been on horseback with shields and banners and so on. It looks just like any other Crusader army, any other European army. Even the stance of the legs of the horses are so similar between our Jewish text on the right and our Christian text. I've given you this one, produced in Avignon in the 14th century. Or the same manuscript, but a different page. So the similarities are just so striking. One final page, or some of the pages, just to show you the text of the Golden Haggadah. Beautiful artwork, or beautiful handwriting, major big headings to the paragraphs like Manishtana and Avadim Hayinu, as you see here. And this is on display in the British Library Treasures Gallery with so many other wonders of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, etc. past, and including some Shakespeare and Jane Austen. It's just an incredible room where you could spend hours. And I saw, thank you, Judy Goldberg, I saw your little comment there in the beginning. Greetings from my tour, the tour that I led of England last summer, and I see Sally's with us as well, maybe some of the others from our group from last summer, where we visited Oxford, Cambridge, and London, and actually saw a number of the items that I'm showing you today. The Golden Haggadah is right here in this room, prominently displayed. Great memories of our time together last August. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Sarajevo Haggadah. In the interest of time, there's others I want to show you, but I want to mention it because it's famous. Barcelona, 1350, now in Sarajevo. We know it traveled through Italy, but I mention it because if you want to get a good sense of what a medieval manuscript was all about, I highly recommend the historical novel by Geraldine Brooks called People of the Book, in which she reconstructs how this manuscript was created in Spain, traveled through Italy, and wound up in Sarajevo, where it survived not only World War II, but the horrors of the Bosnian Serbian wars of the 80s and 90s. So this is a great story, and I just wanted to commend that book to you. Christian surprises, well, there's nothing more surprising than this. This is the Monk's Haggadah. It was produced in a monastery in Bavaria, late 15th century. Printing has already been invented by Gutenberg a few decades earlier, but they were still writing manuscripts by hand, as we'll see. And this one, in this case, a monk named Friar Erhard wanted to have a copy of the Passover Haggadah. He was interested in Jewish things. And he wrote a Latin commentary on the Haggadah. And this great volume was produced just a few years ago, if you can see on the bottom left there, by my colleague David Stern of Harvard and two others. So again, just the wonders of our text and what we can learn. Here is the Hebrew Haggadah text with Latin marginal notes put in by Friar Erhard. And his prologue lasts 12 pages. I gave you the first page and the last page of his prologue, in which he explains the entire Passover ritual for obviously a Christian audience. Just fantastic, fantastic stuff. If we had to have a favorite, and we all do, my favorite is the John Rylands Haggadah. This was produced in either Provence or Catalonia, most likely Provence, in the 14th century. It's in Manchester. I'll say something in a moment about the John Rylands Library. It's in Manchester, England, and here is this beautiful page opening up Halach Ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction and the Manishtana. And you just, I have no words fail me when I start looking at these texts. I mean, they're just so beautiful. One of the books I wanted to show you was my facsimile edition of the Rylands Haggadah. Hopefully, all our books will be unpacked by next week, so we'll have it ready for Pesach. And I could make a quip to you. Does your Passover Haggadah look like this? I mean, this is just they're just remarkable. Now, as if you know the Haggadah text, you'll know that there comes a point relatively early on where we have a quotation from Rabbi Elazar. And it says here in the beautiful box of the Hebrew with the gold letters, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Great, wonderful. There's a picture of him on the right, and he's pointing at his name. Now, is that what a 2nd century CE rabbi looked like? And of course the answer is no. That is a medieval individual. Where did our Jewish artists get this idea from? Well, you know where we're going. Look at Christian manuscripts. This is a manuscript, a very early one on the left, from the 6th century now in Cambridge, of Luke, the gospel writer, the evangelist, and on the right, also pretty early, 800 CE, Mark, the evangelist. Look at them in their chairs, look at their robes, look at their books, and then look at Rabbi Elazar in the John Rylands Haggadah. And you get a sense where our Jewish artist, or possibly we cannot omit the suggestion, the possibility of a Christian artist actually doing the artwork for some of these manuscripts alongside a Jewish scribe. You turn a few more pages and you get to Rabban Gamliel. And the word Rabban there in big letters, Rabban means something like our rabbi, our master. He is, of all the rabbis mentioned in the Mishnah, he holds pride of place as one of the great rabbis, beginning early Pharisaic rabbinic scholar. And there's a picture of him. Now, looking somewhat like the one that I just showed you of Rabbi Elazar, but now there's something new. He has a canopied chair. Look at the canopy over his chair. Well, you know where we're going. Look at Christian manuscripts. They also have canopied chairs. This one's in the Morgan Library, or this one also in the Morgan Library. So scholars are seen with canopied chairs. The scholars most likely are bishops. Why? Where did the Christian artists get the idea of canopied chairs? Right out of the church itself. In other words, if you look at medieval church architecture, the bishop sits in a cathedral, the bishop sits in a canopied chair, elevated. That's where these ideas come from. And from the actual architecture that you see here, you get manuscripts looking like this, which then feed even into our Jewish text of the Haggadah. Side point, I've never been to Amiens in France, so I don't know the cathedral here. The Canterbury Cathedral in England, that's a relatively new canopied chair for the bishop, 19th century. It replaced an older one, but I love the picture, so I show it to you. And the one on the right is from the Basilica of San Andrea della Valle in Rome. And it was just a little more than a year ago when I spoke to Rina, first time that I gave a talk for this group on the Jews of Italy. And this was our neighborhood church. This was just up the street from where we were living in Rome. And it's most famous probably because, for reasons that are not clear, Puccini set Tosca Act 1 in this church. Okay, so there's another little tidbit. The things you learn in Passover Haggadah class. Okay. And there you see again all the canopied chairs, including in the Rylands Haggadah. I want to say a word about the John Rylands Library very quickly because most people are not familiar with it. It doesn't have the aura and the prestige of the British Library and the Library of Congress, which we'll get to in a minute. And it was opened in 1900, so it's classic English Gothic Victorian architecture. On the outside, it's nice, but it's not what you'll see on the inside. John Rylands was a wealthy industrialist in Manchester who made his fortune in the textile industry. It was the beginning of what we would today call ready-to-wear. Manchester was one of the great engines of the Industrial Revolution, including in the cotton and textile industry. They were importing cotton from British-ruled India, from the American South, and so on. He was a bibliophile, and when he died, his wife used the family fortune to create this remarkable library. That's the outside. Let's go in. This is the inside. She intended it to be a cathedral to learning, and obviously she succeeded in building this great monument to her husband. And it is a place of pilgrimage for scholars. I've been there before. My wife Melissa and I are planning to go back to Manchester this summer. It has special place in my heart. My mother grew up in Manchester. She came of age in Manchester, and I still have family there. So I call this a pilgrimage site for those of us who love libraries. The Washington Haggadah in the Library of Congress, written by Joel Ben Simeon. Look at the date, 1478. We know he came from Germany, the Rhineland, but he moved to Italy. So we don't know where he wrote this, but this is his great production that's in Washington today. And again, beautiful illuminations. Look at that, up close, and just the word ha, behold, or this. Here's the Manishtana page. And I haven't used the word colophon yet because most of our manuscripts do not have a colophon. So let me now introduce you to what that means. Colophon is a short inscription at the end of a manuscript by a scribe, in which the scribe tells you something about himself, when and where and so on. In this case, he doesn't say where, but we know his name, right? All the others, I don't know who wrote the Prato Haggadah or the Golden Haggadah. We do know that Menachem, whoever he was, wrote the Bird's Head Haggadah, but generally we don't know this information because those manuscripts don't have colophons, but this one does at the end of it. And it was written in the Jewish year, which we can translate to 1478, by Yoel ben Shimon, Joel ben Simeon. And he has a pun there. And he says, and the work has been completed. And then he says, ve, and you're supposed to read that either do, meaning and the ink, period, or vidayo, and it is sufficient, right? So he has a little bit of a scribal pun there for those who know how to, and if you know the word die is the same as you see in dayenu, right? So it is sufficient. Dio would mean ink, and dayo it means it is sufficient. Lovely little wordplay that our scribe gives us. By the way, he's relatively late, right? Printing has been invented. Hebrew printing is just getting started in the 1470s and 1480s. But he was trained, of course, to be a scribe, and he continues the scribal practice as you see here. Eventually, scribal practices would die out as everybody shifted over to the printed book. But because he's relatively recent, right, only 500 plus years ago, not as old as the others, we happen to have about 10 or 12 manuscripts written by this one scribe. And here I am to give you a little bit of my world, the reading room at the Library of Congress, where I'm holding the manuscript in my hand, and it gives you a sense of what it looks like and its size, not very large, in my own hands there. We end with printing, which I just said something about, and I just want to show you one early printed Haggadah. It may be the earliest, and I'm not sure about that. It's the Mantua Haggadah. Although Gutenberg lived in Germany and invented the printing press in Mainz in 1455 or thereabouts, there was a movement of printers from Germany to Italy. It's the Renaissance. And in the late 15th century and early 16th century, this is already 1560, Italy becomes the great center of printing, and especially Hebrew printing. Printing presses are set up in Rome, in Naples, in Venice, in a little town called Soncino, and this is where Hebrew books come to be printed. In this case, in Mantua, in northern Italy. And so you see the difference of a printed book, and they are still trying to imitate some of the scribal material, including some of the artwork here. And I wanted to, and this is printed by a Christian. Most of the printing presses were in the hands of Christians, but they had Jewish workers with them. The Jews would supervise the work. Jews would lay the font, set the font, and then it would get printed. So they obviously had to have Jewish-Christian cooperation during the 15th and 16th centuries in Italy. So, and we actually know the name of the printer and the Jewish supervisor, as you can see here. I want to direct your attention to the figure in the lower left. These are the four sons, and this is the Chacham. the wise son. And look at the figure in the lower left. Who is he and what's he supposed to be? The wise son in the Mantua Haggadah looks exactly like Jeremiah on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Look at the stance, look at the beard, look at the hands, look at the crossed legs, look at the chair. I highly doubt that Isaac ben Samuel Bassan ever was in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, but I wouldn't be surprised if the person who did the artwork, which were made from woodcuts and then included with the Hebrew font, whether it was Giacomo Ruffinelli himself or some unknown person who did the work that you see here, had been to the Sistine Chapel, had seen Jeremiah, and then used that as the model for the wise son of the Haggadah. It doesn't get better than that. Jewish text, Christian surprises, the Passover Haggadah through the ages. Todah, thank you very much.
We've had a number of questions come in over time, and probably at this point it would be good if Len made us co-spotlight us. I have one comment, and that is that we have at our house a printed version of the Rylands Haggadah, which is really lovely and wonderful. And if anybody wants a copy of that, you can order it. I believe the publisher is Harry Abrams in New York. So that's a good comment.
Before we go to the questions, Rich, I just want to encourage people to do that, to bring these to the Seder table if you own any of these. And don't worry about getting wine stains on them. I didn't show you any, but the medieval manuscripts have wine stains on them as well, not surprisingly, right? Because they were actually used at people's Seder tables. I neglected to hold up the one book. Let me show it to you. You see it's the Golden Haggadah on the page, by Mark Epstein, whom I mentioned, of Vassar College. And he goes through 4 different Haggadot here: the Golden Haggadah, the Bird's Head Haggadah, and 2 others, which he describes in great detail and explains them for you. The Rylands Haggadah is treated in here, and a 4th one, which I didn't show you. So these are the treasures that we can all use at our Seder table to enliven the discussion and pass them around and show people, right, and talk about the artwork. And don't worry if you don't end till 2 a.m. Go ahead.
Okay, we have a few questions. Hopefully we'll get these all answered by 12. Stephen Parkoff asks, are all the old Haggadot that you showed complete, maybe except for the songs, including Hallel?
Yes, thank you, Steve. All of these medieval Haggadot, not those Cairo Geniza ones, which are very fragmentary, but all the medieval Haggadot from Prato to the early printed one that I showed you are complete. They do have everything in them. The one, as you said, the one exception would be some of the songs at the end, which are more like appendices, not really part of the Haggadah. As you probably know, we have this phrase, Chasel Sidor Pesach, the Pesach Seder is completed, and then we go on for another 20 minutes of singing songs. Okay, well, so they're addenda.
Another question from Stuart and Marianne Sender. Are you saying that Jews in Greco-Roman culture would recline for meals generally? I always assumed that they only did so on Pesach.
We have no evidence one way or the other. So maybe they did it only on Pesach and as a symbol of being free men, and so on. But they may have done it generally if they were part of a Greco-Roman tradition. One of the most remarkable buildings at Sepphoris, Sipori in the Galilee, is a villa with a triclinium. There's no evidence to suggest that it was not Jewish, so it was probably a Jewish palatial home with a Roman-style triclinium there, in which case they would have been eating and drinking and imbibing in the manner in which I showed you.
Rebecca Green asks, was writing in the Haggadot written over other writing?
No, not real. No, in this was the parchment used earlier for something else? Is that the
I think
question?
that's what you mean.
No, these would be so. I mean, you know, these are such expensive products that you start with brand new parchment, which you obtain high quality parchment. You can tell whoever was the benefactor of these productions was clearly wealthy, and they didn't reuse anything. Everything was done from scratch. Yeah.
Steve Lerner wants to know, and I think you partly answered this question, could some of the artists on Jewish manuscripts be not Jewish?
Right. And hi, Steve. And we just there's no way of knowing. I don't think we have a single instance in the handful of places, not with Haggadah, with Bible manuscripts, in the handful of places where we know the name of the artist, uh, so we sometimes get a scribe's colophon and an artist's colophon. In the handful of places where we have the name of the artist, they are all Jewish, to the best of my knowledge. So it's always a question, and it's always possible when you see some of the things I showed you, but it's also not proven one way or the other.
Bob Smolin wants to know, please repeat what year we have the first documented Haggadah. Should we assume that the Seder was first done as the result of extrapolation from the Bible and was documented in Mishpatim?
Right. So the earliest, the actual Haggadot are from 900s CE. The one at Penn and the one at JTS, both written rather crudely or primitively. But the outline of the text, including the three questions and other elements, eating matzah, eating maror, and so on, and the cups of wine, all of that is mentioned already in the Mishnah from 200 CE. We don't have any copies of the Mishnah from that early. So it's clear that the basic Seder is present by the second century CE to be sure, and the Mishnah is not legislating that such should occur. It's reflecting what already does occur. So by the second century, if not the first century, perhaps even while the temple was standing, in some sort of probably Pharisaic system where rituals were being taken away from not away from the temple, were being brought into the home to parallel temple rituals, which opens up a whole other question. Not sure if it's there in the Q&A at all. You know, was the Last Supper a Seder, right? And the answer is possibly.
Thanks to Judy and Steve for helping to answer that question. And I'm going to move on to Rebecca Green's next question. Who buys the printed Haggadot in the 16th century?
Oh, all the Jews, right? You now you could have more than one copy at a table. Um, People will buy them. I mean, the Jews are buying Haggadot now, and Bibles, and everything else that they would need, Siddur and everything. Printing opens up the world of these texts to the average person. And by the way, the parallel occurs in the Christian world, not so much amongst the Catholics, but certainly amongst the Protestants of Northern Europe. I should mention, and I have to go back and check my photographs and remind myself which one it is. I was once in the Library of Congress reading a printed book, early printed Hebrew book, and in the back, at the end, there's also a colophon. I mean, we think of colophones for manuscripts, but there's a little colophon by the printer in the back telling you his name and where he printed it. And he says, like it's the most wonderful thing that's ever occurred, and I made 300 copies all at once. In other words, prior to printing, 300 scribes would have to do 300 productions. And in an instant, he was not an instant, you have to set the type and do this and do that, but he was able to make 300 copies all at once. And he mentions that as if it was the greatest invention of the world, and in fact it was.
Thank you, Sally Steinberg Brent and Judith Goldberg, for your kind comments. And also Jeff, Opera Addict, who says, I appreciated the opera connection.
That church is amazing. When you're in Rome,
Yeah.
just keep walking into the churches. But that is where Puccini set Tosca Act 1.
Abigail Hepner Gross comments, I just this year bought the Medieval Haggadah anthology, which has the highlights from many different things we saw to get today.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And Lynn Rosen says, thank you so much. Is there a way to have a copy to distribute to some friends? The answer from my end is yes. We have recorded this. Please send a request to our Kol Rina website, and we'll have it for you in a few days, and certainly before Pesach. Lenny Levin, who says, you are reminding me of our recent trip to Spain, in which the tour guide pointed out the Moorish influence on Christian church architecture, noting that the Christians employed Muslim artisans in building their churches during the Reconquista.
Thank you, Lenny. And in fact, you can go one step further than that. That's right. The Christian churches have all that Moorish influence because they saw the mosques and sometimes converted mosques into churches, most famously in Cordoba. But you then can transfer that to the medieval Jewish manuscripts, most famously the Kennicott Bible, which is the crown jewel of all Hebrew manuscripts housed at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The artwork on the Kennicott Bible produced in Spain is all Moorish. It's got the kind of arcades, and even our word arcade comes from Arabic. It's got all that kind of artwork built into the manuscript. Absolutely. Thanks for reminding us of that, Lenny. Yeah.
Natasha Cooper-Benisti asks, what was happening in the Mizrahi communities during these days before printing existed and afterwards? Did it parallel what was happening in Europe in the Ashkenazic and Sephardic communities with regards to who had access to Haggadah?
Okay, thank you for that great question, which I welcome for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're right. After the Cairo Geniza, everything that I showed you went to Europe. And that's where you have the tradition of Christian art, which influences Jewish art and Jewish manuscript production, as we saw. Islam does not have that tradition. Islam has beautiful art, but as you probably know, no figural art. It's all geometric and calligraphy and so on. And we have, to the best of my knowledge, almost no haggadot from the Islamic world where Jews were creating anything with the kind of geometry and so on. And we just have so little. We're grateful, of course, for the 300,000 documents of the Cairo Geniza, but we don't get, for example, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century haggadot, to the best of my knowledge. But I can tell you the following. We have at Rutgers, in our special collections at our library, a collection of 50 Yemenite 50 Yemenite Hebrew manuscripts. Now the oldest one is 15th century, but the rest are from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and even probably 20th century. And they're manuscripts, I repeat. The printing press did not reach Yemen until the 1870s, when the British brought the first printing press, and when they had made Aden a colony of the British Empire. And that was only for English and Arabic. The first Hebrew printing press didn't get there till around 1890, which means that the Yemenite Jews continued the practice of writing everything out by hand. And we have 2 haggadot in our collection. And if anybody wants to email me, please do so. And you can find my information very easily at Rutgers' website, Department of Jewish Studies. And I can send you the links because these are all digitized now. They're all part of the digital record. And so you can actually look at these Yemenite, probably 18th or 19th century haggadot. No artwork, but the text is wonderful. And the instructions, by the way, are in Judeo-Arabic. They tell you to break the matzah, to do this, to do that. Hebrew letters, but Arabic language. So that's what's going on in the Middle East in the Jews in the world of Islam.
Stephen Parkoff asks a question, made a comment. Artwork in Haggadot did not stop in medieval times. Look at the modern, and I may pronounce this wrong, Zik Haggadah, S-Z-Y-K. Amazing, and one by Saul Steinberg.
Right. Thanks, Steve, for reminding us. Haggadot in the age of printing continued with some of the artwork, as I showed you, from the Mantua Haggadah. I think there was a revival, especially in the 20th century, for doing these kinds of haggadot. But with all this beautiful artwork, the Schick Haggadah and a few others, they're all printed. Right? I don't think anybody. I mean, they're done by a artist as a art production, but they're not individual manuscripts like the medieval ones. And then they get printed, and many of us have them in our homes. So, but yes, there has been a revival in the art of the Haggadah. Just make sure that you use it and you get wine stains on it. Make it authentic.
Arnold Goldstein asks, some of the texts appear to be written in sloped font, whereas most of the texts appear to have vertical letters. Is there some significance to this difference in the font within the same text? Are we seeing a right-handed or left-handed scribe writing the text?
So the really good scribes write everything in what we call square letters. They're upright and everything looks great. And I showed you a number of examples of that. In certain cultures, handwriting is different from one to the other. I think almost all, except for the early haggadot that I showed you right before the break, I think almost everything I showed you is written in square letters. If you noticed any that were slanted, that's probably a slightly more cursive script. In Spain, they developed their own cursive Hebrew script, and some of the marginal notes may be in that. So yes, that would be the answer to that question.
One question here, a comment by Jeff Opera Addict. There was just a great Zoom series on Zyk, S-Z-Y-K. Is it available on YouTube? Do you know?
No idea. No idea, but good to know about it. Thanks.
Steve Parkoff has another question. Have you researched the artwork in the scrolls of the Book of Esther?
No, I have not. I have to comment, which may have been implicit but not explicit. I am not an art historian. I rely on Mark Epstein for that. I work mainly on the text and textual ideas, except for the artwork. But I've learned so much about artwork by studying these medieval manuscripts from Mark Epstein, from one of my Rutgers colleagues, and just from reading books by other colleagues. So I have an interest in it, but it's not my main specialty. But I can tell you, this is just serendipity. I was at the University of Illinois last month, and I went into their manuscript collection. My colleague there was hosting me and took us to the rare book room in the library, and the librarians brought out an Esther scroll with artwork around the margins, just beautiful artwork. And it's apparently from 18th or 19th century Italy, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So I know little about it, but I just smile whenever I see these things. So thanks.
Jeff Opera Addict has a comment that you can all see. He recommends Arthur Zyk and the Art of the Haggadah, and there is a YouTube on here if you want to, anybody can copy that, it's available. Stuart and Marianne Sender have another question. What did the Latin commentary in the monk's Haggadah say in general? You can answer that.
It's one of the books that's in one of my boxes, so I didn't have a chance to go back and look at it in advance. But my recollection is that it is generally quite favorable to the Jewish tradition. There may be an occasional comment. After all, it is the 1500s in Europe. There may be an occasional comment about the Jews and Jesus and so on. I don't remember. But I think in general it's quite favorable, explaining to a Christian world what Jews do on Passover.
I think at this point we've come to the end of our questions, and I just want to say thank you to Len Levin for being our side backup tech person, and also thanks to Rachel Levin, who is our Eventbrite maven. Maybe I should say maven now, I'm not sure. Because she has been responsible for making sure your reservations were taken and they all got back to you. And what I like to do at this point point is, first of all, say thank you for really helping to focus us on some of the wonderful, wonderful history of the Haggadah. We loved having you today. And because everything's on Zoom, I'm going to give you everybody a moment to open up their, or unmute themselves, I should say, so everyone can personally thank you, applaud, whatever they can do in order to say how much we appreciate what you did.
Am I on here?
Thank you.
Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Nice to see so many friends
Miss Tasha, she's
and to meet
enjoying
some
it.
of the new people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And at this point, we are welcoming you back in 2 months. So everybody, come on back. We'll all have a seat for you at the table. And you'll be in the front row because it's on Zoom. So thank you so much. And we will see you in a couple of months.
I was on
Happy
here.
Pesach to everybody.
Tag Sameach.
Yeah.